Hello and welcome to the CodCast. I'm Chris.
I'm Katrina.
And I'm Matt.
Excellent. So here to talk about the quarterly. We're back in the CodCast room, all three of us this time. Got the whole team that's in the office today. So here to talk about quarterly, just a quick run and review of what we've been doing over the last quarter and save everyone reading the whole thing, because we know everyone reads it in detail rather than flicks to the back and just checks the last number in the 5B, don't we?
That's what I do, but
We wrote it in detail, and that takes a fair amount of time. So big news during the quarter. Just right after the quarter, we announced a new deposit, number 4. Lucky number 3 for the open pits, Category South. What's your view of that one?
yeah, look, I mean, it's more copper, 36,000 tonnes at, right in the right spot. It's only about 2K south of MG14. And we're expecting it's going to slot in very early in the mine plan and generate some nice early revenue, hopefully. We've got still got a bit of work to do on that. That'll be probably in the next quarterly, looking at mining and those sort of things. But yeah, positive little addition to the project.
Yeah, and when we announced it, we said the next steps were to start the mine plan. Katrina, you're obviously looking forward to the mine plan and getting your hands on the details of the physicals and the mine plan.
Oh, 100%. You know, we can add another year and a half to the project. I think that will make a material difference.
Yeah, so a little bit of work to do. We're just hopefully going to start that very soon.
Yeah.
And then the next steps are obviously modelling it into the project. Right? Excellent.
The bigger news, I think, is probably on the metallurgical front.
Yeah.
So we got about not 100%. Was it last month that we published or the month before?
I think we announced the results in June because I was actually at the RIU Gold Coast conference for my sins.
Yeah, so in June we put out our Windabout recovery numbers.
Yeah.
And we saw about a 12% boost in the rougher recovery, which is the important one. I mean, between tails recirculation and everything, you generally don't lose a lot of copper once you've got it through the rougher.
Yeah.
And yeah, that was a pretty big deal. Obviously, 12%. You know, you don't have to mine it; you just get extra copper for every ton.
Yeah.
So that's probably the single biggest thing that happened during the quarter.
Yeah, and I mean, again, we talked about this extensively on that CodCast, and even I think cutting some flotation cells. What I'm very keen on, and we've asked our metallurgists very nicely if we're allowed to come into the lab with our cameras, maybe film a little bit of what this test work looks like. I had a shareholder just sort of dropping us a message saying, hey, can you do some more like behind the scenes stuff? We're really enjoying this. So I want to thank Joel for that idea. So hopefully we'll be able to bring out one in the next couple of weeks or so, actually showing what that work looks like. Just the avoidance of doubt, there won't be any sort of unreleased information in it. You'll see lots of general grey slimes and sludges and bubbles and things. But, I actually find that quite exciting. And you'll be coming along to the lab as well.
Yeah, I'm really excited. To see the science in action, really.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, everyone puts out these work about, another metallurgy announcement. Yeah. And I think shareholders roll their eyes, don't they? And say, what on earth does that mean? I think people understand drilling, don't they? They kind of go, well, I get what that looks like. I get what that means. I get what the results are with, work in the metallurgy space. It's a little bit more challenging. So hopefully we can use our cameras for good and do a little bit more interesting and educational stuff there as well. From a more practical standpoint, because frankly, all the content and cameras and information in the world doesn't really matter if it doesn't translate to results. You'll be getting your hands on those.
Yeah, no, this is the one I'm really excited for. A change in recovery can result in a material change in the economics. So we're just waiting on the final test work to be done so we can apply, this result to all of our deposits. So hopefully we'll get those results in this quarter.
Yeah, okay, for sure. We're talking to the Mets pretty regularly. Yeah. We've got some assays coming at the moment. That's still for Windabout. And then once we've got the initial results confirmed, we'll hopefully be able to put that out to market, and then we'll move on to the other deposits. So we don't have an exact timeline, but certainly this quarter we'd expect to see those results.
Yeah. Yeah. So everything's on time, on budget, exactly as we announced in the original announcement, and we'll hopefully get that next stage information out to the ASX as soon as possible.
And then straight to Katrina and straight into the model and straight into the scoping study.
Yeah. So I roll another scoping study update.
Well, you do keep wanting better numbers.
Yes. Yeah. This is an iterative process, isn't it? Scoping studies, feasibility studies, the difference between a scoping study and a PFS, I think, depends a little bit. I mean, there are, Institute of Engineering guidelines, but ultimately it comes down to the level of work and the plus or minus. And there is a huge overlap in a lot of this work. So we're advancing. We have started, I mean, we talked about approvals a little bit as well. You've been obviously managing that with Tim.
Yep.
Tell us a bit more about the approvals.
Yeah, so the process we're going through at the moment is, confusingly enough, also called scoping.
Yes,
but
it's nothing to do with scoping.
No, it's approval scoping. It's basically working with the government to determine exactly what we will need to do, and more importantly, what we won't need to do to get a mining lease and eventually to start mining.
Yeah, so it's defining the scope of the approvals within the context of the project.
Yes, very specifically within the project context, as opposed to what it used to be prior to this process, which was every project had to go through every assessment, regardless of whether that was relevant to your particular project or not.
Yeah.
So, we're working on finalizing all of that work and should be able to put out a release when it's done.
Brilliant. So, busy quarter. We've obviously defined and released a mineral resource estimate for Kettle Grid South. There's the huge and really exciting work on the flotation recoveries, which we believe is very, very material. And then, of course, there's the approvals advancing well, and we might talk a bit more about why approvals are so important in a second. But there's always a huge amount of work during the quarter which doesn't make it into the quarterly or ends up as a bullet point. Especially the funding. This isn't something that we just haven't taken out of a template. This is an enormous amount of work. Huge part of what we do behind the scenes. We've completely updated the data room. We've done things like had a complete re-review of the metallurgical work up to date. I mean, that was a 150-page document that's been put together to really make it easier to read and easy to understand what's happened, because see, that's one of the biggest parts of the project, with work going back to 2017 by this team. And one of the key parts of the work we've done this quarter is really rebuilding a lot of the data room. One of the things I've experienced being on the other side of funding and M&A deals, of course, is that you've got to make it easy to do deals. And it's the companies that are most prepared and provide the information quickly, effectively, efficiently, in a really user-friendly format are often where the best deals get done. So again, we've put a huge amount of effort into that. I mean, I know you've rebuilt the model from the ground up, haven't you?
Yeah, so just effectively just made it a lot easier to use, made functions easier for companies just to tweak their input their own numbers, change recovery figures, change commodity prices, FX rates, discount rates, anything they want to do, just made it easier for them to run their own numbers and see the impact of those changes to the economics. So
yeah, I mean, having worked, in Big Four consulting and having done a huge number of model reviews, I mean, I'd estimate I've reviewed over 150 models in my career. I will say this thing is a work of art, and I'm not going to take a lot of credit for that. That's all on you. It's really great stuff. So we're seeing the copper M&A market hotting up. We're seeing a lot of headlines. I think I saw this morning there were 2 independent mining publications all talking about the M&A market for copper heating up. Mostly at the big end of town, though. What are you saying? What's exciting?
Yeah, so I think the biggest news this year in the M&A market was BHP's bid to take over Anglo American. And even though that wasn't a successful bid, it didn't phase them at all. They still, really trying to go ahead with their copper initiative. So you can kind of see that in the last couple of days with the recent news where BHP just announced a takeover with Lundin Mining.
That's for Filo, wasn't it?
Yeah, so it's a 50-50 joint partnership with Lundin Mining to take over Filo Corp. And Filo Corp owns the Filo de Sol project in Argentina.
Yeah.
And that has about a $2 billion NPV on it. And that takeover was for about 4.1 billion Canadian dollars.
Okay.
So
big end of town, right?
Big end of town, yeah. So in the smaller end of town, the most recent deal we've seen is the Rex mining deal with Mac Metals Group, which is part of the Salim Group, and that was for about $400 million.
Yeah, huge deal, huge premium.
Yeah.
They clearly want to get that done.
Yes.
Richard at Rex, I think, has played an absolute blinder there.
Mm-hmm.
They had talks with the Japanese group going on at the same time. They brought in a strategic, which was pretty clever. Then the strategic's going for everything. Which is pretty cool. I mean, the base Hillside project, I mean, that's been around a long time, sort of since the early 2000s, hasn't it?
Yeah. I mean, it's gone through a couple of ups and downs over the years, but there's some big advantages to being around that long. I mean, they have their approvals largely in place. They've gone through PFS and beyond, I think, into a more of a definitive feasibility study, and that's the kind of project that gets purchased, I think. You have all the benefits similar to Elizabeth Creek of being in South Australia. You've got ESG, you've got a stable jurisdiction. And then all you can really do is just keep going, keep pushing, move along the feasibility curve and get your approvals in place, and eventually good projects get recognized.
Absolutely. One thing I will note is you talk to shareholders about approvals, and there's often not a lot of excitement. And fair enough, right? It's approvals. It's an administrative process in many ways. But if you want to get value, if you want to get up that curve, the Lassonde curve, Valley of Death, is called that for a reason. You want to get up that curve. I'll tell you what, approvals are a good way to get moving on that. They're also relatively low cost. High hassle, an enormous amount of work, especially if you've got a small team and you're trying not to spend hundreds of thousands of dollars on consultants. Well, we're not trying, we're just not. So you do it yourself, it's a lot of work, but every single group that you talk to, whether it's royalty funding, whether it's industry groups, whether it's private equity, whether it's North Asian groups, the first question is, what's the status of your approvals?
Well, there's two ways to de-risk a project. You can move up the feasibility sort of ladder. You can go into PFS and spend an insane amount of money in some cases, particularly if you're drilling out a really, really large porphyry or some of these projects that might cost millions and millions and millions of dollars. But yeah, absolutely, that de-risks the project.
Yeah.
Or you can take a look at approvals and government risk, and you can de-risk it that way, which is a much lower cost process. They're both risk at the end of the day, and taking them off the table makes you a more attractive takeover target.
Yeah, I mean, as a geologist, I mean, you know this better than I do, but a good geologist will look at the resource model and they'll be able to say, look, how this is what the mineralization looks like. There's a certain level of homogeneity there. This thing isn't hugely variable. It's not jumping around with grades and thicknesses. We can make some assumptions on that. But it's often quite hard, especially for overseas groups, to make assumptions about approvals in the same way. And we've seen things change, and it's if you have problems with flora and fauna, or if you have community engagement issues, these are issues which are not solved. I mean,
no, and for all that we understand Australia and the nuances of various parts of Australia, if you're looking at a project from Tokyo or Seoul or London, it's not necessarily going to be obvious which state has a high risk versus a low risk from a government approvals point of view, which particular region is going to have more or less significant environmental hurdles or hurdles in the form of traditional owners or anything like that. So they have to assume the worst if you don't have things in place.
Yeah.
So getting them in place is again just a really valuable and relatively low cost way of de-risking.
So in summary, it's been a busy quarter, lots of work, but lots to come, lots of news flow happening this quarter, which is even more exciting. This has been the CodCast. More importantly, thank you to people who actually watch this. And again, amazed by the number of views and gratified. And thank you for the comments and emails. And thank you for watching. So we'll look forward to the next one. I hope the next one will be either exciting announcement summaries or in the lab, which I'm really looking forward to. Thanks, everyone.
Thanks.